know the faith and those who live it. I'm your host, Renee Kranz. In the studio with me today is Michael Pauley. He is the Executive Director for the South Dakota Catholic Conference. Welcome, Michael.
Great to be back, Renee.
Yeah, you haven't been back for a little bit, but I think it was
while.
earlier this year.
Yeah.
Michael, of course, lives in Rapid City, and he is the Catholic Conference Director for the entire state for both dioceses. So you do a lot of running.
I put a lot of miles on my car every year, that's for sure.
You do. And whenever you are here, we try to get something from you at least, or you want to at least offer something, which we so appreciate. Okay, so there's one major thing you're really, really working on, which is Amendment G. But we're actually not having you here to talk about that today.
We're going to do something different today.
We're going to do something different. So we're also taking a stand on several other ballot measures. I don't know if there are there other amendments, or is G
Actually,
the only amendment?
there's 7 on the ballot, and the Catholic Conference is taking a position on 2 of those.
2 of those,
yeah.
okay. So the one we want to talk about today is initiated measure around marijuana, recreational marijuana. So will you tell us about this measure?
Yep.
So we know what in the world we're looking at here.
All right. So this is called Initiated Measure 29.
Okay.
And it is a measure that would allow people to possess, grow, ingest, and distribute marijuana and marijuana paraphernalia.
Okay.
And of course, the first thing I always say when I talk about this to people is that if you're feeling a sense of deja vu, there's a reason for that. It's like, have we been here before? Well, yes, we have. This will actually be the 3rd consecutive election that South Dakota voters are considering the issue of recreational marijuana.
Right.
So brief history, in 2020, it was on the ballot in the form of something called Amendment A, which was actually, as the name would suggest, a constitutional amendment. Right. So they were actually going to write into the South Dakota Constitution this marijuana legalization. And that was a campaign where, frankly, the pro-marijuana advocates dumped in a lot of money, and the opposition was not very well organized.
Right.
And so perhaps not surprisingly, that passed, not by a landslide, but 54% of the people voted in favor of it, 46% voted against it. So it actually did pass. But then there was a lawsuit filed challenging the amendment for being unconstitutional because it violated the single subject rule, that it addressed more than an impermissible number of subjects. And so the Supreme Court threw that out. And so that basically made us back to where we were before. And so the marijuana industry came back 2 years later. This time it was Initiated Measure 27, and there was a more organized opposition this time. And that year, the measure actually failed, with 53% of the people voting no to 47% voting yes. Right. So it was almost like just the mirror opposite of the result from 2 years earlier.
And that was 2022 when it was defeated again.
That was 2022.
When it was defeated,
That's right. And then, and so now we are here, 2024. They're pushing again. This time it's called Initiated Measure 29. So 2 years ago it was Initiated Measure 27. Now the numbers changed to 29, but otherwise we're basically talking about the same thing.
Yeah. And was it 2022 that they passed the medical marijuana, or was that 2020?
That was 2020.
Okay.
So yeah, so I neglected to mention that is that at the same time that recreational marijuana was on the ballot, there was also medical marijuana. Right. And a lot of people believe that may have been why recreational passed, was because people are very confused to have both of these issues on the ballot at the same time, you know, and thinking that maybe you had to vote for both of them, for either one of them to work, or, you know.
Which would explain why it failed 2 years later, the recreational marijuana.
Yeah, because then there was no question,
Right.
you know, we've legalized medical, and so we're just talking about, you know, so-called recreational marijuana use. Right. I really hate that term, by the way, you know. When I think of recreation, I think of hiking or canoeing or racquetball or whatever, but, you know, consuming a, you know, psychoactive drug, I guess that's some people's definition of recreation.
Right,
so,
right.
Yeah.
Okay, so as you said, it was a very narrow defeat last time. Why do you think voters are so closely divided on this topic? Because I mean, to some of us, it seems like a no-brainer, but it's not necessarily the case.
No, well, and I think it just comes down mainly to an education gap, is that there is a huge gap between public perception of marijuana and the reality
Right.
of what it actually does. And to put some numbers to this,
Yeah.
the Gallup research company did a poll back in 2018. So this is about 6 years ago. And they asked respondents to rank a bunch of substances in terms of whether they thought they were harmful to those people using them.
Okay.
And so, for example, 96% of respondents felt that cigarettes were harmful to those who used them. And 94%, just 2% less, felt the same way about chewing tobacco.
Okay.
But only 56% of the people in this survey felt that marijuana was harmful to the person using it. So do the numbers there. 96% say smoking cigarettes is harmful. 56% say the same thing about marijuana. That's a 40% gap.
huge.
So just think of 2 out of every 5 people walking around the street think that, yeah, smoking cigarettes, that'll kill you.
Right.
But marijuana, totally harmless.
Right.
Now, the good news is that Gallup actually did that exact same survey this year in, I think it was July, and the numbers have moved some. The percentage of people now who think that marijuana is harmful to those using it has increased 10%. So it's gone up, but yet it's still below what people think about. There's still more people who think that chewing tobacco is going to really hurt your health than who think that marijuana is going to hurt your health. And so in terms of just the reality of what we're talking about, I would say marijuana has never been a harmless drug, but what people don't realize is that it's changed over the decades. It's become a far more toxic drug. And here's a little bit.
The drug of the 60s was much different.
Exactly. So here's what the Mayo Clinic says about today's marijuana. And this is a quote from their website. Today's marijuana is enhanced genetically and bred for potency. The tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC content, about 10 milligrams per joint in the 1970s, is 5 to 15 times more potent today.
Yikes.
THC is the active ingredient that gives cannabis its narcotic and psychoactive effects. So basically THC, or tetrahydrocannabinol, I had to practice a lot in order to pronounce
would
that
not be able to say
fluently. But it's far more potent today. So as we like to kind of joke, this is not your grandfather's weed.
Right.
This is not what hippies were smoking at Woodstock in 1969. This is a dangerous drug. And so I think part of the reason why we have this dichotomy is because, frankly, people in my generation, I'm in my mid-50s, and lots of people in my generation, will recall a party they were at in high school or college, and somebody passes around a joint, you took a puff, maybe you thought it was kind of gross, but nothing weird happened. And so you kind of come away with this attitude of, well, marijuana, it's not my thing, but it's not a real big deal either. I mean, what do I care if Joe down the street is using it, And that's the mentality that I think is what we have to overcome.
Definitely in the Gen X generation, my generation as well. That is totally, in my experience, the attitude. That's no big deal at all.
And unfortunately, we're finding it's a real big deal.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the specific impacts of legalizing marijuana. We will talk as well about what the effects of the drug actually have on you. But other states have made this legal. How many? Do you know?
Gosh, I should know
It's
that
quite
off
a
the top of
few.
my head. Yeah, it's more than 20. I mean, it's a significant number.
So we actually have a history now.
Yes.
We have examples of what this does. So can you tell us what will happen if Initiated Measure 29 is passed?
Sure. Well, one thing we're seeing when we look at data, especially from Colorado and Washington State,
where it's been legal for a while.
It's been legal for a while, yeah. So these are kind of our best states for sort of benchmark data. Is first of all, you see a significant increase in drugged driving accidents. People impaired by marijuana, so more traffic fatalities resulting from people driving while impaired. We see a huge increase in calls to poison control centers, and this is mostly related to this phenomena of marijuana edibles, because that's another thing where people are not tracking with how this drug has changed. This is no longer just a drug that is smoked, but the THC content is extracted, and it's put into what we call marijuana edibles.
Right.
It's brownies, it's gummy bears. They have these little packages of things that look just like children's candy, but they're laced with high concentrations of THC. And so one of the just really sad aspects of this is that in states that have legalized it, there's this huge increase in children having inadvertent exposure to this. They're over at a friend's house, they see a chocolate there, and they eat the chocolate, and 2 hours later they're in an emergency room, because they've just consumed an enormous amount of THC, and they had no idea. So this is it's a little bit like we've become the wild west, in terms of the impacts here.
Right.
So yeah, it's not been a happy experience in the states that have legalized this.
Right. Does it? I know people always. I've heard it said, and I want to know if this is true, that marijuana leads to drug use of more dangerous drugs as well.
Yes.
Is that what they're finding in those states?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. There have been a lot of studies that show that marijuana, and look, if you get online and look this up, you will find the pro-marijuana advocates, they resolutely dispute the idea that marijuana is a gateway drug.
Right.
But the reality is that there's a lot of studies that show that it is like the entry-level drug, and that people who are doing this are then getting into other things like meth. And so, it's a problem.
Well, I think we just have to think about human nature in general, and you have to be able to say, yeah, I'm just going to guess that's probably true, because you know how humans are.
Yes.
I mean, that's what we do. Okay. If you just joined us, we're talking to Michael Pauley, the executive director of the South Dakota Catholic Conference, about the marijuana initiated measure on the ballot in November. Okay. So if we think about children and young adults, how does this affect them? Especially in their lives, because I have to imagine it does more than just get them high.
Yes, absolutely. So, one of the things that we've learned, we were talking earlier about the states that have gone down this path of legalization. We now have, just this year, there was another study that came out analyzing the states that have legalized and looking at the rate of young people using the drug. And the evidence is now, in my opinion, indisputable that in the states that have legalized marijuana for adults, nevertheless, the rates of youth usage increase. And this is, again, something that the $33 billion marijuana industry wants to tell you, there's no, move along, nothing to see here, there's no problem. And like the measure that we're considering in South Dakota, it's for 21 years and older. And they're going to pump that fact because they want to just say this is just adults. Let adults do what they want to do. But the reality is that when you legalize it, it's everywhere. It's far more accessible, just like alcohol, and the children are getting access to it. So what does it do to youth? Well, the 2020 study reports that legalization is associated with a 25% increase in marijuana use disorder amongst 12 to 17-year-olds. And the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA for short, they issued a report in 2021 saying that marijuana use among youth and young adults is a major public health concern. And the report notes that early youth marijuana use is associated with, and here's the laundry list, neuropsychological and neurodevelopmental decline, poor school performance, increased school dropout rates, increased risk of psychotic disorders in adulthood, increased risk for later depression, and suicidal ideation or behavior. And this is a point that I just want to emphasize. When the leaders of our two Catholic dioceses issued a statement on this marijuana measure a couple of months ago, one of the things that they said in that statement is that legalizing marijuana is throwing fuel on the fire of our mental health crisis in this country. Unless you've been living under a rock, you have probably read some of the stories about suicide rates are on the increase. The number of Americans who have been clinically diagnosed with depression has gone up dramatically. We are in a mental health crisis in this country. And by no means am I suggesting that all of that is caused by marijuana. There's
No.
all sorts of various causes. It's a multi-causal, phenomenon. But there can be no doubt that marijuana is not helping and is in fact making it worse. And so it's not exclusively the reason why this mental health crisis is happening, but it sure isn't going to do anything to solve it. It really, they're throwing the fuel on the fire is already burning, but then this just, throws on fuel and exacerbates it.
It seems like it'd be like saying you have someone who is depressed, mentally unstable, whatever. Let's give them some alcohol.
Yeah, you wouldn't do that.
You wouldn't do that.
You wouldn't
do that. But yet, hey, it's okay. I hadn't thought of it that way, but that really is huge.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to say there?
Sure. Well, just one more thing, and this is just not specifically to youth use of marijuana, but just use of marijuana in general. The National Institute on Drug Abuse states that frequent users of marijuana experience lower life satisfaction, poorer mental health, poorer physical health, more relationship problems, less academic and career success, higher likelihood of dropping out of school, and more job absences, accidents, and injuries. So, again, it's quite a long litany, and it also explains why on this issue, I mean, obviously, a lot of churches, not just the Catholic Church, but many churches in South Dakota are speaking out against this. But we're also seeing business groups, not generally known for taking a stand on moral and cultural issues, at least here in South Dakota, but yet, like the Chamber of Commerce, is coming out against this because they see how it impacts the workforce. I have a friend of mine who owns a construction company out in Rapid City, and they struggle to fill worker positions because they can't get people to pass a drug test, So again, getting back to that question of what do I care if Joe who lives down the street is smoking marijuana? Oh, you'd be surprised.
Yes.
I mean, the house that you're about to buy is costing more because they can't find workers to work there. I mean, the ripple effects of this toxic drug just kind of ripple out throughout society.
Yeah, it's just not good for us societally. Okay, what does the church teach about drug use and marijuana in particular? Sure.
So the Catechism, and if you want to look it up, this is paragraph 2291, says that the use of drugs inflicts very grave damage on human health and life. Their use, except on strictly therapeutic grounds, is a grave offense. And if you want to know, well, why is it a grave offense? It's actually good to kind of go a few paragraphs earlier in the Catechism to paragraph 2288, where it says, life and physical health are precious gifts entrusted to us by God. We must take reasonable care of them, taking into account the needs of others and the common good. Yeah. And so with regard to marijuana, the Catholic Church definitely, here in South Dakota, we certainly are not unique in coming out against marijuana legalization. There's also a measure like this on the ballot in North Dakota, and the North Dakota Catholic Conference has come out against it. In Minnesota, the legislature recently legalized recreational marijuana, and the Minnesota Catholic Conference just came out with a kind of comprehensive guide explaining all the different ways in which Catholics need to, even though it's been legalized, they're calling on Catholics to not use marijuana, to resist this deliberate impairment of your ability to reason. Because that is why the church is against it. Is that it's a deliberate attempt to impair your reason to escape from reality, and that is not something that we want to see. And so, the other thing too, I'll just mention for listeners who may want to look this up. Colorado, as we mentioned, one of the states that first went down this road. It's been just a train wreck there. And Archbishop Aquila, the Archbishop of the Archdiocese of Denver, actually came out with a pastoral letter. I think this was like a year or 2 years ago, just documenting all of the many ways in which marijuana has ravaged Colorado. And so for people who want to read more, that pastoral letter from Archbishop Aquila is just marvelous.
And he's one of, he's one of our real, there are many great bishops, but he, I think, would be towards the top for sure. Just a very, very good bishop. Okay. We only have about 30-ish minutes left.
30
Michael,
minutes.
30 minutes.
30 seconds.
Sorry. Yes, thank you. If they want to learn more, I know they can go to the Catholic Conference website. What is that website?
Yep. sdcatholicconference.org. And right on the homepage there's a little section. You'll see a marijuana leaf with a little red slash through it to point you in the right direction to resources where you can learn more about this issue.
And they can also find there information about Amendment G.
Yes.
And there are several other things that are going to be on the ballot that you're going to have what the church's stance is on that, correct?
Well, we haven't. Those are the only two that we've taken a position on so far. But we may.
Usually there's a whole bunch of them, so maybe it's not so bad this year.
Yeah. We'll stay tuned for updates, but hopefully at this point we're only going to take a position on two.
Right. Thank you so much for coming in
Thanks.
and talking to us about these very important things. If we don't talk about these things, we just go into the ballot box blind. So
and that never works out well.
No, it does not. It does not. Thanks again, Michael.
Thanks for the time.
You bet. So when you go to vote, of course, voting is on November 5th. Be sure to vote no on Initiated Measure 29, and of course, no on Amendment G. Don't stay home. It's important that you get out and vote. That's it for us today. Hope you'll join us again next week for more Catholic Views.